Okay, we have our third Pro Tools first video, and this one is going to be hopefully quicker and pretty dry, not musically based much at all. I kind of want to round off the edit window interface so that you understand what you're looking at and how to use it. And hopefully most of the music stuff is developing as we continue to play around and really apply what we knew already to something that's just a different interface. Okay, so a little bit of this is going to be review, some of it's going to be new. So looking at the edit window, we have talked about the edit modes, but they are so important. I want to go through that again very quickly. So in slip mode, again, you can move it. These essentially establish how you're able to move your clips. And in slip mode, you can move freely in between grid line values. And in grid mode, you can only snap or jump to those grid values. You can always change your grid value and have some more precision, if you want to call it that, but grid snaps to the grid point. The tools, okay? I can't say this enough. Yes, you have a zoom tool, okay? So you can kind of click and drag over, but I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with quick keys. Command and the open bracket is zoom out horizontally. Command and the closed bracket is zoom in horizontally. The trim tool only works from one side or the other, allows you to trim or shorten a clip from the left or from the right. If we want to get rid of that measure in this one clip, you can do that way. And because I'm in grid mode, I can be confident that I have trimmed this to be exactly 3 measures long. You have the selector tool. If I want to cut out, say, the second measure, I can place my cursor, click and drag, and then Command X or Control X on a PC, and that will get rid of that particular measure. So the selector tool allows me to select from within a clip. The grabber tool allows me with one click to highlight an entire clip, and to click and drag, I can move that entire clip using the grabber tool. And again, the most important of these is to actually learn how to click in the frame around them and to engage what's called the smart tool. The smart tool allows you from the left to use what tool? The trim tool, or from the right. And depending where you place your cursor, above or below what I call the equator or the middle of a clip, if it's above, it becomes the selector, and if it's below, it becomes the grabber. Okay? And again, for us, we really only use, for now, we will only use the pencil tool in the MIDI editor, which you engage or you open up the MIDI editor window by coming down here and opening up, clicking on that arrow. And I want to say this again because this wasn't totally clear in the first video, that you must engage the track on which you want to see your MIDI notes, your MIDI data, or that you want to edit your MIDI data. So right now I'm looking at the bass line, and you don't even see, I can scroll, the bass track is highlighted. If I click on the strings track, I see the strings part. And the notes associated with that. If I click on drums, there you go. All right. So you must highlight the name of the track you want to be able to edit or add MIDI data to. Edit modes and edit tools review. I think I've done that for the most part. Moving to the right of those tools, I'm going to leave that as my smart tool. That is my operating starting point. This section is called the counter, and the counter shows you where you are in your song, All right, so by hitting return, I can go back to the beginning of the song. And this is more of a navigational thing that I've noticed a lot of people. They want to place their cursor at the beginning here. And really the easiest way to do that is not to place your cursor, is just hit return. So hitting enter or return brings you back to the beginning of your session, your song. You can also hit return up here in the transport. We'll get that there in a moment. Okay, so this counter tells you that your cursor is also referred to as your playback head, meaning old school tape machines had a playback head that the tape went over, and that allowed you to hear what was on the tape. We don't have tape, but essentially it's still called the playback head. So where you are placing your cursor to start playback, now I'm at measure 2, beat 1, and 0 subbeats. If I head over 1/16th note, these are called ticks, 240 ticks, but we don't need to worry too much about that. What you really want to be aware of is what measure you're on and if you're on the beat or not. And this is why you don't want to be in slip mode. You know, I think I'm close, but I'm not really there. If I'm in grid, then I know that's where I want to paste something, or that's where I want to cut something, etc., etc. This section here is useful in that when you highlight or select a clip, it tells you the starting point of the clip. So this is measure 2, beat 1, and the ending point, which is measure 3, beat 1. And this is actually really important concept to kind of understand, that when you are counting musically, 1, 2, 3, 4, you don't stop at 4. You let 4 finish, and 4 really finishes, beat 4 really finishes at beat 1 of the next measure. And that will be really important later. It also tells you the length of your selection. So my selection is 1 measure long. If I highlight 2 measures, my starting point changed to beat 1 of measure 1. It still goes all the way through beat 1 of measure 3, and it's a 2 measure selection. All right. Other important things, I'm not going to go over every single thing. The grid, being able to turn on and off the grid. If you don't see your grid lines, please remember that this illuminated grid in green, different than the mode, this is literally the lines, that turns on and off your grid. Especially important, totally important in both windows, but super important in the MIDI editor. You cannot figure out where you need to be if you don't have your grid lines visible. Okay, so I still haven't figured out why this doesn't default, but your grid values, all right, I suggest always working in 16th notes, or always starting in 16th notes until you need something different. And by clicking on 16ths, even though it isn't 16ths, clicking on it again gives us 16th notes in the MIDI editor. I'm going to skip nudge and that kind of stuff. This grid, this default note duration is really, you want it to follow the grid. And kind of what that means is, as I start drawing my notes with my pencil, by a single click, it is drawing whatever the grid value is. So if my grid is 16ths and I click here, I get a 16th note. If it's 30 seconds, it's going to be 30-second notes, which is why I suggest following the grid. If I say half notes and I'm in, my grid is 16ths, then you can see that my note is actually 2 entire beats long. It's a half note, which is equal to 2 quarter notes. So really leave that, or make sure that this is follow grid. And if you ever have that problem, sometimes settings get changed. Then you always want to have this speaker illuminated. That's essentially so that you can listen to your MIDI notes, especially if you have a keyboard attached. Next, to the right, let me just see. did we get over? The counter, start end length, yes, grid values, and we even talked about note duration default. The Midi controls. This section here is called the Midi controls. What do we need to know? A count off. All right, so a count off, I think it was called count in Soundtrap, is going to be 2 bars of the click track, if it's not muted, before any recording happens. Now, again, this is really more relevant to anyone who has a MIDI keyboard at school. We would all have them. Or those of you that might have an electric guitar and an interface and want to be able to record things. You would click the count off. You would put your track into record ready, the one that you want to record on. You would put your transport, we'll get there in a second, well, we'll get back to it in a second, into record ready. Record enable, record ready. Now it's just waiting for me to press the play button, at which point we would hear 8 counts before anything started to move. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so again, I just recorded over. I didn't play anything because I don't have a keyboard attached at the moment. If we had a keyboard, a MIDI keyboard, or a microphone, we would have a count off. We don't need that because if you don't need it if you're not recording. Meter. This is actually really important for those of you who are a bit more schooled in music and want to experiment with songs and music that are not in 4/4 time. Soundtrap also gave us 3/4. So if I click here, I can actually enter whatever meter I want. So if I want it to be 6/8, if I want it to be, 7/8, I can do that. I once worked with a band that all their songs were either in 11. It was really kind of annoying, but a lot of fun. Tool is a band, if you're into kind of heavy rock, that rarely plays in 4/4 time. Anyways, so we have the count off, we have the meter. Okay, again, 4/4 means that there are 4 quarter notes per measure. If you change this, let me put that in there. Okay, let's do 6/8. Then you can see that this your measures change in terms of what they look like and the number. Oh, this is still oh yeah, well, it's 4. And if I change it, let's say to 3/4, it shows me just 1, 2, 3 in my measure. I should say that I just did something weird, but I'm not going to explain it. Okay, putting this back to 4/4. 4/4. Okay, the metronome, turning it on and off, or just mute it. So I tend to leave this engaged and mute my click track if I don't want to hear the metronome. Just too many places to do the same thing, so I just mute my metronome. The conductor. The conductor, we'll revisit what the conductor does at a later time, but keeping it off allows you to just manually enter a single tempo for the whole song. Those of you who are interested in doing any kind of tempo changes, here's a little something for you. Say your song plays 4 measures at 95. So I'm going to actually turn on the conductor. I'm going to come over here to my tempo ruler, click on this plus sign, and say 95. That establishes right now the whole song at 95. But say at measure 5, it actually changes to 105. I place my cursor at the 5th measure. I click here on that plus sign again. I go 105. And now you can see that these become a little smaller. I have 4 measures at 95, then a tempo change to 105. If you ever accidentally do that, by the way, on a Mac, Option and click gets rid of that. Don't know what that is on a PC, but hopefully, since we're operating most of us in manual tempo, you can't actually do any tempo changes. This last one over here, I'm going to ignore that one. This one is called Midi Merge, and again, it's only relevant for those of you who have keyboards. If you remember, when I put the drum track into Record Enable and I started recording, notice I don't have a count off, so as soon as I hit play, it's going to go. Midi Merge allows for you to add notes to something that you already have without recording over what you already have. So if you are making a drum beat, for example, and you are in loop playback, you can do your kick and snare, and then it'll loop back, and you can add your hi-hats, and it will not affect the kick and snare. It won't record over it. Quantizing we'll get into later, and it's really, again, more relevant to playing than to drawing. So that's why I'm going to skip it. And then you have your transport, which is pretty straightforward. You have your plus, you have your stop, your plus, your play, your record enable, which again, only if you're going to be recording either MIDI data from a keyboard or a microphone, you would hit use this. You have your return to 0. You have rewind, which kind of just sends you back, in this instance by measure. Same for going forward. I would say I rarely use these buttons because I use return to go back to the beginning. I use the space bar for starting, and I use placing my playback head, my cursor, to establish a starting point for playback. And I don't tend to come up to the, we'll get into this when we talk about editing a little bit. Actually, I'll go ahead and do it, sorry. So one of the most important commands is, say I would like to cut this clip here. If you go to edit, it is called separate clip. At this point, it's at the selection, and it's basically Command E or Control E on a PC. So I place my cursor, I hit Command E, and now I have made a slice. What was I even talking about? Good one. Edit. I will have to come back to that one. That's embarrassing, but I'm not going to redo the whole video for it. Let's see. Why would I do that? All right. But that's editing. Command E, Control E. Rulers. Okay, one last thing over here. Transport rulers. Let's see if I remember while I'm talking. So you have your bars and beats ruler. In the more advanced version of Pro Tools, you actually have a number of different rulers. You can see minutes and seconds up here. You can see other things as well. But bars and beats essentially shows you how where you are musically. So the same as Soundtrap. I do think it's a little easier to tell where you're at when you zoom in and whatnot. So quarter notes into the second measure. You have your tempo ruler, which really only tells you in manual tempo that you're at 95. You have your meter, which is 4/4. And remember that you can change your meter, but you can also do meter changes. So again, those of you more advanced with music, if you did 4 measures at 4/4, you can actually put in a meter change wherever you place your cursor, as long as your conductor is engaged. And markers. Markers are really, really useful for saying, like, here's where the chorus is. And you can type in a marker, you can name it, and say, my chorus begins right here. And it's just a visual cue to be able to, when you have a song, to advance where various parts of your song start. Okay, so there we go. Review of the edit modes and tools, and most of the universal controls and buttons in the interface. Okay, um, this track list here are what tracks are visible. I can click on these dots and hide everything. So if for some reason you don't see anything, look in your track window. Sometimes it's useful to hide everything and say, I just want to work on my drums and I want to make this track super big so that I can see everything. But I don't really find that all that useful because I can still do that with all my tracks visible. I can come to my drum track and say I would like to see it extremely big, and that just pushes everything else out of the way. So not that useful. Okay, there we go. We're done.